actually affect the physical architecture of the developing brain. This means that brains aren't just born, they're also built over time based on our experiences. Just as a house needs a sturdy foundation to support the walls and roof, a brain needs a good base to support all future development. Positive interactions between young children and their caregivers literally build the architecture of the developing brain. Building a sturdy foundation in the earliest years provides a good base for a lifetime of good mental function and better overall health. So just how is a solid brain foundation built and maintained in a developing child? One way is through what brain experts call serve and return interactions. Imagine a tennis match between a caregiver and a child, but instead of hitting a ball back and forth across a net, various forms of communication pass between the two, from eye contact to touch, from singing to simple games like peekaboo. These interactions, repeated throughout a young person's developing years, are the bricks that build a healthy foundation for all future development. But another kind of childhood experience shapes brain development too, and that's stress. Good kinds of stress, like meeting new people or studying for a test, are healthy for development because they prepare kids to cope with future challenges. Another kind of stress, called toxic stress, is bad for brain development. If a child is exposed to serious ongoing hardships like abuse and neglect, and he has no other caregiver in his life to provide support, the basic structures of his developing brain may be damaged. Without a sturdy foundation to properly support future development, he is at risk for a lifetime of health problems, development issues, even addiction. It's possible to fix some of the damage of toxic stress later on, but it's easier, more effective, and less expensive to build solid brain architecture in the first place.
Today, Module 50 is pretty straightforward. We're going to talk about parents, peers, and early childhood experiences, and as the video suggested, those years in a developing brain's lifespan are extremely important. So today we're going to talk about how early experiences modify the brain and ways in which parents and peers shape children's development. The video clip that I used as an intro is going to be, I'll show you the end at the end of the lesson today, but this is one of the reasons that we have programs like early childhood development programs like preschools and high cap and things like that, because the government's realized that as far as its civilian population is concerned, it's far more cost effective to offer those sorts of opportunities to kids early on in their lives. And so your government spends money doing so. Our genes, as expressed in specific environments, influence our developmental differences. We are not blank slates, at least according to some scientists like Douglas Kenrick and his colleagues. We're more like coloring books, with certain lines predisposed and experience filling in the full picture. We are formed by nature and nurture, but what are the most influential components of our nurture? How do our early experiences, our family and peer relationships, and all the other experiences guide the development and contribute to our diversity? That's what we're going to talk about today. So embryos, if we go back two modules ago to how we were developing from the zygotes into fetuses. Anyway, if hopefully you're free of teratogens, hopefully you guys remember what those vocab words mean. Embryos receiving differing nutrition and varying levels of exposure to toxic agents, that makes a difference in the womb as far as the development of a baby's brain goes. Nurture continues outside the womb, where our early experiences also foster brain development. So first of all, it has to do with what you're fed from your mother as you're developing in the first place. And then, of course, what happens outside of the womb after birth. Our genes dictate our overall brain architecture, but experience fills in the details, developing neural connections and preparing our brain for thought and language and other later experiences. So, how do early experiences leave marks in the brain? Rosenweig and David Kretsch and their colleagues opened a window on that process when they raised young rats in solitary confinement and others in a communal playground. When they later analyzed the rats' brains, those raised in a rich environment, an enriched environment or rich environment, which simulated a natural environment, usually developed a heavier, thicker brain cortex. In 14 of 16 repetitions of this basic experiment, the rats in the enriched environment developed significantly more cerebral cortex, relative to the rest of the brain's tissue, than did those in the impoverished environment. So from the brain stem and brain cortex to the cerebral cortex, all see growth by being exposed to a more enriched environment. After 60 days in the enriched environment, the rats' brains' weights increased 7 to 10%, and the number of synapses mushroomed by 20%. Such results motivated improvements in environments for laboratories, farms, zoo animals, and for children, of course, in institutions. This is a trained brain. A well-learned finger-tapping task activates more motor cortex neurons, the orange area on the right, than were active in the same brain before training, on the left. What this is trying to show is that being exposed to things early on and receiving training in things early on actually have a big impact on the brain. So at the juncture of nurture and nature is the biological reality of early childhood learning. During early childhood, while excess connections are still on call, youngsters can more easily master such skills as the grammar and accent of another language. Lacking any exposure to language before adolescence, a person will never truly master any language, according to this. Likewise, lacking visual experience during the early years, those whose vision is restored by cataract removal never achieve normal perception. The brain cells normally assigned to vision have died or been diverted to other uses. So the maturing brain's rule is you gotta use it or you lose some of it. In procreation, a woman and a man shuffle their gene decks and deal a life-forming hand to their child-to-be, who is then subjected to countless influences beyond their control. Parents feel enormous satisfaction in their children's success and feel guilt and shame over all their failures. They proudly display, "My child is on the honor roll," and they wonder what went wrong with a teenager who is repeatedly suspended from school. Freudian psychiatry and psychology have been among the sources of such ideas, but blaming problems from asthma to schizophrenia on bad mothering isn't necessarily exactly right. Societies reinforce such parent blaming, believing that parents shape their offspring as potters mold clay. People readily praise parents for their children's virtues and blame them for their children's vices. Pop culture endlessly proclaims the psychological harm toxic parents inflict on their fragile children. This is one of the reasons that shows like Toddlers and Tiaras and things like that are popular right now. But do parents really produce future adults with an inner wounded child by being overbearing or uninvolved, pushy or ineffectual, overprotective or distant? Are children really so easily wounded? Well, the answer is parents do matter. The power of parenting is clearest at the extremes. Abused children who become abusive, the neglected who become neglectful, the loved but firmly handled who become self-confident and socially competent. The power of family environment also appears in the remarkable academic and vocational success of children of people who fled from Vietnam and Cambodia. Success is attributed to a close-knit, supportive, even demanding family. Yet, In personality measures, shared environmental influences from the womb onward typically account for less than 10% of children's differences. In the words of behavior geneticists, two children in the same family are as different from one another as are pairs of children selected randomly from the population. This implies that parents should be given a little less credit for kids who turn out great and blamed a little less for kids who don't. So knowing children are not easily sculpted by parents' nurture, perhaps parents can relax a bit and just love their children for who they are. Peers have a significant influence over the developing brain, though, as well. I'll give you just a couple of examples. Children who hear, preschoolers who hate a certain food often will eat the food if put at a table with a group of children who like it. Just an example of early childhood kind of peer influence. Children who hear English spoken with one accent at home and another in a neighborhood and at school will invariably adopt the accent of their peers, not their parents. And teens who start smoking typically have friends who model smoking, suggest its pleasures, and offer cigarettes. Part of the peer similarity may result from a selection effect, as kids seek out peers with similar attitudes and interests to themselves. Anyway, according to Howard Gardner, who's pretty important in developmental psychology, he says parents are more important when it comes to education, discipline, responsibility, orderliness, charitableness, and ways of interacting with authority figures, but peers are more important for learning cooperation, for finding the road to popularity, for inventing styles of interaction amongst people of their same age. Youngsters may find their peers more interesting, but they will look to their parents for contemplating their own futures. Parents often choose the neighborhoods and schools that supply the peers. Part of what our peer group and our society provides are social expectations and shaping us around our gender rules and things like that. So I'm going to give you some quick definitions of things that we need to be thinking about. So gender roles are social expectations that guide women's and men's behavior. A role refers to a cluster of kind of prescribed actions, the behaviors we expect of those who occupy a particular social position or a particular gender. Gender roles have changed over time, and they vary depending upon where you are in the world. And obviously, there are exceptions to what I'm about to read. But generally speaking, gender roles vary over time and place. But in North America, men were traditionally expected to initiate dates, drive the car, pick up the check. Again, this is historic as well. Women were expected to decorate the home, buy and care for children's clothes, select the wedding gifts. Up through the 1990s, moms, about 90% of the time in a two-parent U.S. family, stayed home with a sick child, arranged for babysitters, called the doctors. Even in recent years, compared with employed women, employed men in the United States have daily spent about an hour and a half more on the job and about an hour less on household activities and caregiving. Bureau of Labor Statistics in 2004 says the same thing in Australia when men compared to women devoted 54% more time to unpaid household work and 71% more time to women paid 71% more time to childcare. Our gender identity is an individual person's sense of being male or female. Some critics have objected, saying that parental modeling and rewarding of male-female differences aren't enough to really explain gender typing, which is the way some children seem to be more attuned than others to traditional male or female roles. In fact, even in families that discourage traditional gender typing, children organize themselves oftentimes into kind of a boy's world or a girl's world, each guided by different rules for what they're supposed to do. The social learning theory assumes that children acquire this identity by observing and imitating other gender-linked behaviors and by being rewarded and punished in ways for acting in certain ways themselves.